According to Malcolm Gladwell, you become an expert in a field after 10,000 hours of practice. So why are so many people poor communicators, despite first learning how to communicate when we can first make complete sentences? When we learn yes and no? I mean, even crying because of hunger or discomfort is communicating. Let's just say we've been communicating our entire lives. Why are we so bad at it? And how do we get better? I'm Paul for Rock Solid Refuge. In crisis, start here. Here's the biggest thing when it comes to communicating to your kid. It doesn't matter whether or not you listen as much as it matters whether or not they think you're listening. No, hold on. Sorry. That statement is true, but now that I'm saying it out loud, it sounds like I'm saying you don't have to listen to your kid as long as they think you're listening. I actually kind of mean the opposite of that. That was ironically poor communication. Maybe a better way to say it would be this. It doesn't matter how well you're listening if your kid doesn't think you're listening. All right. So here's a few basic things you can do to make sure you're communicating, I'm listening. Make sure that the TV is not on in the background. Make sure you don't have to pull something out of the oven in 10 minutes or you have some other deadline that'll pull you away from a conversation. If someone comes to the door, ignore them. All that exists in this time that you have set aside is you and your kid. Make eye contact with them. Turn off your phone. Turn off your phone. Turn off your phone. These are all just examples of limiting distractions, but what it does is it shows your kid that they are what is important to you. The world is put on hold for them, and in a world that never stops, where people can always get a hold of you and everyone and everything is vying for your attention, shutting the world out even for 5 minutes can be a powerful expression of love and care. So why is listening so important? It is the number one thing you can and should do in a conversation with your teen. But why? Simply put, if you're listening, you're not interrogating, you're not lecturing. This means that you need to be comfortable in silence, or at the very least, you need to be willing to be uncomfortable with silence. That means not interrupting, leaving space for them to think, not arguing when they say something that you disagree with, even if you strongly disagree with them, even if they're just flat out wrong. It means you listen, and this is important for the next step, you remember what they say. All right? So you've shut out distractions, you've sat quietly, you've listened, now they've stopped talking and they're waiting for you to say something. They're not just thinking through what they last said, they're actually looking for a response. What do? Do you tell them your thoughts? Do you share your own anecdote? No. And follow me on this. Remember what I said right at the beginning. It doesn't matter how well you're listening if your teen doesn't think that you're listening. It's not enough that you have listened to them. Now it's time to demonstrate that you've listened to them. So, how do you do this? How do you prove that you've been listening? You prove it by summarizing everything that they've said. You summarize it in good faith and ask them if you've understood them properly. Then let them expand on it. Let them correct you. And then you summarize that again, and you keep doing this until they agree that what you have said is correct, that you have understood them. A former staff member of ours, Steve, would tell a story of this one student that we had who would just talk nonstop for more than an hour. This was just his default setting. He would talk and talk and talk and talk. And so Steve, he sat down with him and he just listened quietly for an hour. He didn't say a word for over an hour. And then he took 5 or 10 minutes to summarize everything that this guy had said. And when Steve had finished, The student sat back and he thanked Steve, telling him, "You're the first person who's ever listened to me." Which is absurd, okay? Steve was not the first person to listen to him. I'd listened to the guy. Other staff members had listened to the guy. His parents had listened to him. But because Steve took the time to prove that he had listened, the student felt like someone finally understood him. Again, it doesn't matter that people had listened in the past. What mattered was whether or not he felt like people had listened. In his book, Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss talks about the difference between that's right and you're right. What do you want to hear from your child? That's right or you're right? The instinct is you're right. We want our children to agree with us, but ultimately, if you're in a conversation with someone and you start telling them, you're right, what are you really saying? You're saying, please let me out of this conversation. You're right is the same as, yes, dear. So if your kids start saying to you, you're right, you're not in a conversation anymore. You need to stop. You probably need to apologize and try again later. That's right, on the other hand, is all about coming to an understanding. Your child knows that you've heard them. They know that you're actually paying attention. And you get there through summarizing what they're saying. That's right is a place in the conversation where you're coming alongside them rather than confronting them. You're essentially getting them to agree with themselves. You're showing them that you understand them. So summarize what they said back to them. All right, we need to shift gears for a second here because we're missing something from this, aren't we? We're talking about conversation, but we've not talked about what to talk about, right? Where do I begin? What am I supposed to say? Some parents struggle to get even 5 words out of their kid, and that's probably because your kid isn't comfortable in your presence. They don't like being around you. This is a normal teenage problem, okay? This is not unusual. The best way to encourage communication is to talk about what they want to talk about, what they already know about, what they're interested in, what they are passionate about. No matter how pointless or absurd or silly it may seem to you, it matters to them. Especially in these early conversations, you're not trying to drag them kicking and screaming into what you're interested in. You're trying to be involved in what they're already interested in. This is kind of like what we talked about with getting to that's right. If you show you're willing to engage with what they're interested in what matters to them, then they'll be more willing to engage in conversations of greater substance. Will it feel natural? No! In fact, the first time you do this, your kid is probably going to immediately be like, okay, you're acting weird. So their defenses are probably going to be up because this likely isn't how you've acted or spoken their entire life. Remember what I said about being comfortable in silence, or at least being willing to be uncomfortable? That's probably what you're going to experience now. All right, let's take a step back. I want to look at everything we've talked about so far and ask, what is the point? What does all of this accomplish? We think of communication as a method of exchanging ideas, but what does good communication accomplish beyond the information, beyond the content of our speech? What are we really talking about here? We're talking about relationship. If you can't communicate with your child, there really is no relationship, not an influential one at least, but you can rebuild this relationship. It won't be easy, it won't be without tears, but we want to just encourage you and say, it is possible. We've seen many relationships, probably worse than yours, where parents have been able to reconnect with their teen. All right, let's let's recap this episode because we have gone long. We have gone on for a while here. First, it doesn't matter how well you're listening if your kid doesn't think you're listening. Limit your distractions. Make eye contact. Don't interrupt them when they're speaking. These are the absolute basics of effective communication. Second, once you've listened to your teen, summarize everything they've said and then give them time to clarify, correct, or expand on those points. Remember, you're trying to get them to "that's right," not "you're right." Third, meet them where they're at. Especially in early conversations, you're looking to build relationship. And the best way to do this is to talk about things that they want to talk about. They're probably not comfortable talking to you, but this is normal. Make sure you're asking them about things that they are passionate about, even if they seem silly or a waste of time to you. Now, I've thrown a lot at you these last couple of videos. You're probably going to forget some of these things. Come back, watch these videos as a refresher from time to time if you need to. And remember, if you fail to implement these strategies, if you come out of a conversation and realize, I talked nonstop through that conversation, that's not the end of the story. Get up, dust off, try again. You're probably going to mess up. Don't give up. Don't focus on your failures. Look for the small victories. You can build on those. And we're not done talking about communication. We've only just scratched the surface. Next video, we're going to get into how to manage feelings in a conversation so that you and your kid are engaging with one another with your minds and not with your emotions. In crisis, start here.